All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Keeping Up with PGA's webinar. I hope I don't disappoint any avid golf fans out there when I tell you that PGA in today's webinar stands for Partner Government Agency. We are so glad you've joined us today, and there's a lot to keep up with, so let's just get started. My name is Anna Garant, and I'm a Senior Marketing Manager for Customs Brokerage here at UPS. And it's a great pleasure to host this call and introduce you to our two fantastic speakers today. So if we go to the next slide, we are joined today by Stuart Schmidt, who's a Customs Brokerage Compliance Manager here at UPS. He's a member of the UPS Corporate Compliance Team that ensures UPS is compliant with procedures with CBP and PGAs. In addition to providing consultancy services to UPS customers, he has deep knowledge and experience with trade agreements, foreign trade zones, anti-dumping and countervailing duty, and numerous partner government agency programs. We're also joined by Kelly Wilton, who's a cross-border trade compliance manager at UPS. Kelly has worked in customs brokerage since 1982, and she earned her customs brokerage license in 1988. In her current role, she has compliance oversight over UPS brokerage offices on both the US northern and southern borders. And some of you here in the audience might actually know Kelly, as she is an active member of various trade associations, including a board of directors position with the Northern Border Customs Brokerage Association. So welcome, Stuart and Kelly. We're excited to have you on. Before we move on to our agenda, a few administrative updates. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available to everybody who registered after the event. We encourage participation as always and want to make sure all your questions get answered. So please take use of the Q&A function that you see on the bottom of your screen during the call. And we'll do our best to try to answer all the questions live through the Q&A function, or if necessary, we might contact you afterwards to make sure your questions get answered. For legal purposes, I'm going to have to read the following message verbatim, and then we'll get ready to start. This presentation is for information purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with your own legal counsel for such advice. Do not rely on this information without performing your own research. All right, with that done, let's take a quick look at our agenda today. We'll start with some background on PGAs and then go into our updates, which we have quite a few in line. So we'll talk about Fish and Wildlife Service, Consumer Product Safety Commission, Environmental Protection Agency, Agricultural Marketing Service, and at the end, we'll have some other PGA updates and end it with Q&A if there are any questions to take live. So with that, I'm excited to hand it over to Kelly to get us started.
Thank you, Anna, and good morning, everyone. So let's start with PGA. As Anna said, that's the acronym for Partner Government Agency, not the Pro Golfers Association. So for purposes of today's call, let's just talk about PGA, Partner Government Agency. So each PGA regulates very specific products. We're only going to be speaking about the import aspect of those products, even though the PGA has jurisdiction over both domestic and exports along with the imports. We have to recognize that each PGA does not have agents at every single land, air, or ocean port. So CBP, Customs and Border Protection, has enforcement authority for most of the PGAs. So we'll discuss how that works in just a minute, but I wanted to give you some examples of products that are regulated by certain agencies, because it's very important to know which products may have special documentation requirements, licensing requirements, any sort of fees that might be required. So let's start with a common one, FDA, that's the Food and Drug Administration. They regulate food, of course, for human and animals, drugs for human and animals, but also food contact items such as cookware and dinnerware, cosmetics and other substances that come into human skin. come into contact with human skin. Medical devices, radiation emitting devices such as TV monitors, anything with a laser, so on. So each of these broad categories has its own set of rules and requirements, but the one thing they have in common is that the FDA is tasked with ensuring that the products are safe for human consumption or contact. Okay, so let's talk about EPA for a real quick minute. That's the Environmental Protection Agency. They've got several divisions. One is VNE, Vehicles and Engines. They ensure that gas or diesel engines meet all the air quality emission standards that are out there. We've got TSCA, the Toxic Substances Control Act, to ensure that the chemicals are not hazardous. We've got, EPA has ODS, ozone depleting substances, to protect the ozone layer. And then, of course, we have pesticides and devices. And Stu's going to talk about that a little bit later, because there's some recent changes and change in policy that one might not have expected in regards to pesticides. So that'll be an interesting one to listen for. Then let's just chat real briefly about DOT. So they regulate vehicles for on-road use, such as automobiles, motorcycles, trailers, and so on, as well as specific safety equipment, such as safety belts, tires, bumpers, headlights, turn signals, and so on. So that's just a very small example of what's regulated. And I wanted to just share a couple of these with you just to reinforce the bottom line that almost any product could be regulated by a PGA. And it becomes your responsibility as the importer to know the rules that surround your products and ensure that they don't get delayed or even seized at the border. So again, let's jump to our next slide, please. And here I just want to talk about the process. So I've mentioned earlier that CBP enforces the PGA rules and regulations at most ports of entry. So this is a diagram that shows how that shared responsibility works. So bottom line, the broker transmits all of the data that the PGA needs. At the same time, they transmit the data to customs. And this is done via ACE, the Automated Commercial Environment. Before ACE, the broker or the importer had to submit paper documents to the PGA. But now the data goes through the system edits, which allows the PGA to target specific shipments. Sometimes they may ask for additional documents. Sometimes they want to conduct an examination. All of that is notified to the brokers through messaging, through ACE. But it's very important that we need to confirm that both customs and the PGA have released the shipment before the goods can be used, sold, or distributed in the States. Otherwise, the PGA, if they don't release the goods, they may order re-export or destruction. So if the goods can't be exported or destroyed, then penalties would likely result, which could be up to 3 times the value of the goods. So that's why, number one, it's important that we know which PGAs are involved. We transmit all required data through ACE, and then we follow up to ensure that we did get the release from that PGA. And so that's just, further incentive to ensure you know all of the rules about your products. So let's jump into my next slide, which talks specifically about Fish and Wildlife Service. So the FWS has announced that they plan to fully transition into ACE by the end of this year. The mandate to use ACE won't necessarily impact the importer very much. It's mostly the brokers that will feel the impact. Currently, the import permit must be entered and fees paid directly into the Fish and Wildlife System. Most of us refer to it just simply as EDEX. The broker then will need to enter that EDEX confirmation number into ACE. So it's basically the same process as today with one added little step, and it sounds pretty simple. But we always have to be aware that there's always going to be exceptions and certain special handling that needs to be taken into account in certain circumstances. So bottom line, if you import goods subject to Fish and Wildlife, which includes perhaps items made from exotic leathers, mother of pearl, feathers, and so on, just speak with your broker before this mandate goes into effect to make sure you are 100% covered. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Stu to talk about the CPSC.
Oh, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining, particularly those on the West Coast who may be having breakfast with us here this morning. And also thank you, Kelly, for a nice introduction there. So one of the PGA's partner government agencies that we wanted to discuss today was the Consumer Product Safety Commission and some of the changes that they are proposing along with a pilot. You think back to Kelly's diagram there on the before ACE process. CPSC is still kind of in that before ACE process. So they are finally going to move over into the after ACE process, hopefully after they finish this pilot. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about the CPSC and what they regulate. I've copied a diagram right from their website, actually, and it's really kind of a unique website that CPSC has. Each one of these 9 tiles is an active tile, and you can look in, just click on that tile and see what types of products are regulated. But under like outdoor recreational products, those are regulated for lead content or maybe age appropriateness. Other children's toys might be regulated for phthalates and plastics that are used or small parts. Apparel could be regulated for flammability, for drawstrings. It doesn't necessarily matter why they are regulated. You can see what they are regulated for there. Regardless, they're all regulated for some sort of a safety environment. So, for example, you might ask why do hair dryers have this big ugly plug on the end of the cord? And frankly, that's a CPSC rule. And it's to keep you safe from electrocution. They're typically used around water and sinks and so forth. There was a lot of people who were damaged or even death occurred from hair dryers. So this plug became a mandate. So as I mentioned, you can see the 9 major categories here. Miscellaneous products include things like refrigerators, Christmas lamps, Halloween lamps, those kind of things that might cause a fire. And garage door openers, that garage door opener, that sensitivity that when you get something stuck in the garage door that has to go back up, that reverse sensor, that's part of the CPSC program. Again, all these things have the one thing in common of safety. They also have one other thing in common, is that at the time of importation, they require a certificate of conformity. And so each product must be manufactured and be certified that they meet all the statutes and regulations according to that particular product, whether it's a fire retardant apparel, Christmas lights, or what have you. So the children's products, all the products have to have this testing prior to the creation of the certificate. So all products need to be tested that they meet those standards. Children's products specifically need to be tested by an independent third party. So the difference between what is a general certificate of conformity for any product that is not a children's product is that the children's products need to have a third party testing. So next slide, please. The CPSC has recently announced that they want to conduct a pilot that will begin this transition of the presentation of the certificate to the PGA message set. So currently, as I mentioned, it's a paper document today, unless you have a URL that is either on the commercial invoice. It could be included in the packaging requirements on the outside, but currently CPSC will go out to a website and look at a pre-prepared certificate. But, primarily it is in, some type of a non-automated format. So this pilot, as I mentioned, is the first step in getting us towards the PGA message set. And the pilot will include both those general and the children's products, so that all products will be eligible to participate. And as it is proposed right now, the CPSC is seeking 40 to 50 volunteers to participate. Anticipate that this will probably last 6 months. And the reason I say 6 months is because they might start it a little bit earlier for those that are ready. So if you are ready and signed up and your filer is able to transmit the information, they anticipate it starting in the October 2023 timeframe, but they would like to back that up and get as much information as possible. So UPS does plan to participate and make our systems ready to transmit the data that would be required to support this. And so if you as an importer want to register, we're going to show you how to do that on the next page, then just please make sure that you notify us so that we can work together to make sure that we have the required data elements to transmit. So there will be 2 ways of transferring or transmitting the information. Very similar to the Fish and Wildlife, where there's going to, you will be able to go out to a CPSC website and complete a reusable certificate of conformity. If you complete it on that depository, CPSC will assign you a registration number for that certificate, and the filer can just simply transmit that registration number, and CPSC will pull in the data that's registered with that particular certificate. You can also just file the 7 data elements that are going to be required for the pilot. They say 7 data elements, but it could be, it's always going to be a name and address of a manufacturer, but if there's multiple manufacturers that are contained in that particular product, or multiple providers, or multiple statutes that is being regulated against, it could become a very complex message set. So it's just another reason to participate in the pilot, so you understand what is going to be required for your particular products. And then the covered products, I think that CPSC would like to see in there are children's products, of course. They have a huge interest in phthalates and small parts, lead products. So they're looking to, basically have people participate from, everything that they do regulate, but they'd like those particular products included in particular. They have identified approximately 300 HTS numbers that they plan to include in this pilot. They haven't released them yet. There's some, at first, I think they felt like they didn't need to, that they wanted importers to understand what products that they were importing and how they were regulated, and expected participation. There is some indication that they may actually release those HTS numbers and flag them with a with a maybe required flag, as the other PGAs do on the tariff thing, on the tariff tape, so that importers have an idea of what is regulated and what isn't. So, just be aware that CPSC has also stated that where they have found that a certificate of conformity can be produced within 24 or 48 hours after entry, that they find that there's a high degree of compliance to the laws and statutes. If it goes over and beyond that particular timeline, if it takes longer, for an importer or a broker to submit that data, then they find that the likelihood of compliance to the statutes decreases significantly. So please take a look at the statutes, how they're regulated, look at your certificates of conformity, make sure you have one for every item, whether you plan on participating in the pilot or not, so that when this does go mandatory, you will be prepared. So next slide, please, Anne. So I told you that we would talk about the registration. So, and it's really quite simple. You just send a email to e-filingpilot@cpsc.gov. Subject should contain beta pilot application to participate in the PGA message set. And it does say that the request to participate were due no later than July 25th. I think that was a pretty aggressive date that CPSC had put into the Federal Register. As of last week, they had not filled their 40 to 50 participant hopes by then. So I know that they haven't published a new Federal Register notice, but they are accepting participants willingly. And they do want to get to that at least 50 participants. And in fact, they've indicated that they might go over if they get that much interest. So please register and let us know when you have registered so that, again, we can work with you to develop our systems and communication paths. One other thing I note before moving on to the EPA is that a lot of questions that we get are related to, how do I know if my product is regulated by CPSC? And that is is really a rather simple ask. CPSC has created a great tool. They call it a regulatory robot. It's more of an AI-based or an information-based questionnaire on their website. So you just go out to this website. That's an active link that you will get that with the when the recording is sent out. And you can just type in whatever product you have, and the robot will tell you if it's regulated, how it's regulated, and exactly what you need to import that particular product. So it's just a wonderful tool, and I would highly encourage you to use that. And with that, I will go on to, Kelly had talked about the Environmental Protection Agency and the need for additional information and timing on changes for the Environmental Protection Agency related to pesticides. So EPA has recently begun issuing some notices advising importers that they have not been filing their EPA notice of arrivals in a timely fashion. And the trade kind of pushed back a little bit, stating based on language that's in the current Federal Register notice and in the current regulations, that the verbiage there indicates that filing the notice of arrival at the same time of filing the entry summary is meets that standard. So EPA plans to publish a Federal Register notice, and we believe that they plan to change and quote unquote clarify the timing of that filing to state that the filing of the notice of arrival information on EPA form 3540-1 has to be filed prior to the physical arrival of the cargo. In today's world, the interpretation is that as long as that notice of arrival is filed with the entry summary, and again, prior to delivery to the consignee of the cargo, that is considered a timely filing. So EPA is working with CBP to change that rule. This creates a number of challenges for those that are subject to these regulations. There is no way currently of filing the required EPA data without filing the entry. So particularly in the truck world, in the air world, where product gets put on a truck, for example, and starts heading for the border, that filing is going to have to be completed prior to the arrival of that truck at the port. So EPA has not been real forthcoming about what the timely filing means. Does that mean 24 hours prior to the arrival of that truck? Is it 1 second before the arrival of that truck? Currently, for ozone depleting substances, they have a 14-day window for filing. So we are anxious to see what that prior to arrival timeline will be. That is yet unknown. And so you do want to be prepared to work with your broker to get that information, understand what that filing will be and in that timeline, so that we can get those entries filed prior to the arrival and keep you out of trouble. The EPA has issued a couple of penalties to our understanding. We also understand that they're quite large to begin with, although they can be mitigated. But the ones that I've heard about have started in the over $50,000 range. So they start out quite large, and you do want to be prepared. And like I said, when this comes out, I would begin this process immediately, because they don't seem to be willing to wait for this Federal Register notice to be published and implemented prior to issuing these notices. So if you are involved in EPA pesticides, please look at your timing of the timeliness and the filing of your entries, and make sure that it is done prior to the arrival of the cargo. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Kelly.
Okay, thanks, Sue. And before we go on to the next slide, just one final comment on pesticides and pesticide devices is that many folks don't realize they're importing a pesticides or a pesticide device. By EPA's definition, a pest is any living organism. So back during the height of the COVID craziness, people were trying to import like Clorox wipes or whatever brand name you want to talk about that claims to kill, 99% of bacteria. Or perhaps importing air filters that claim to trap the bacteria or virus. Those are all subject to EPA regulation. And so a lot of folks that had no clue of how EPA's pesticides and devices rules and regulations found themselves in a pinch trying to get those goods imported. So again, just to be aware that it's not one narrow lane that you can stick with it and learn all about it, because if you deviate at all, you're going to find yourself into some other PGA that you're just not familiar with. So on that note, let's jump into the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, AMS Organics Program. This is another program that's going to transition to ACE soon. They're going to make the data set available in ACE to be used by the end of this year, and plan to make it mandatory to use the ACE portal by next summer. So we've got a little time to prepare. So what's it all about? So products that may be declared as organic and therefore regulated by this program would include things such as foodstuffs. To me, chicken and eggs come to mind, right? But also other food products, wearing apparel such as cotton, certain paper products, soap, even furniture if they're using organic fabric on the furniture. There are over 7,000 HTS numbers that will be flagged as organics may be required. And we did have to double check this. Originally, I had it on slide 700, but then I said, wait a minute, no, it's 7,000 tariff numbers that are going to be flagged. This means that if you don't intend to sell, market, or label your products as organic, your broker still needs to bring up that message set and disclaim it, which means saying it does not apply for each and every entry. But if you do sell, market, or label your products as organic, then the broker will need to submit that full PGA message set. A word of advice, it might be good to have your invoice clearly state whether it's organic or not, so your broker won't need to contact you for each and every shipment on whether to disclaim or transmit. So something you can get to work on now. No harm, no foul if you get started on that. if you do certify your products as organic, or you intend to, your foreign suppliers will need to work with their local USDA certifier in their country to conduct the necessary inspections of their facilities in order to be certified. Once the facility and all of the covered products are certified, they're going to be entered into a database by a registration number. And then the broker will need to transmit that registration number as part of their entry data. Again, similar concepts as to the way Fish and Wildlife is going to work, and the same way CPSC is going to work. Minimal data input by the broker, just ensuring we have the necessary certificate or registration number to enter. Right now, certifying imported goods as organic is just a very manual process. It's not well regulated, but do expect that to change by next year. So just again, be prepared for that. Okay, let's jump into our final slide, which is just a couple of high-level highlights on a few other PGAs. So real quick, food and drug, I talked about that briefly in the beginning. So I took a couple of extra notes. Imports of food products, they have to report the DUNS number of the FSVP importer. So FSVP is the acronym for the Food Safety Verification Program. So that importer, what their job is under the FSVP is to ensure that any foreign producers of products they sell in the U.S. meet the same safety standards as what would be required in the U.S. So that importer has to be registered with the FDA. So the DUNS number that your broker reports on each entry for that FSVP importer has to match the DUNS number that they have provided in their registration with the FDA. FDA didn't require this match until just last month because they used to allow unknown to be reported as the DUNS number. That has stopped as of the end of June. So no longer allowed, and there are now systems edits in place that will cause a hard stop if you either attempt to use unknown or if it does not match the registration. So again, just a heads up on that this has recently changed, and you just need to ensure that you can comply with that. And Stu, I know you had a couple of comments you wanted to make on the USDA webinar coming up.
Kelly, thank you. So the NCBFAA is hosting a webinar on August 23rd at 2 p.m. The link to register for that webinar will be in the deck as it gets sent out to you. This webinar is related specifically to the APHIS core portion of the USDA, and even more specific to that, it is related to animals and animal products. I had mentioned earlier on the CPSC slides about the regulatory robot and how an effective tool that is. USDA plans to introduce what they are calling a veterinary assistant permitting assistant. And this will work similarly, that where you will type in information about your product and USDA will spit out a report that tells you exactly how it's regulated, if it requires a permit, if it requires a statement, or if it doesn't require anything at all. So if you import animals or animal products of any type, which might mean milk products, bakery, a lot of foods, those types of things, very good information and probably worthwhile attending. So thanks, Kelly.
All right, thank you, Kelly and Stuart. We're still going great in time, so we have some time for questions live, and we did get some questions in the Q&A, so we can start taking them. The first question, I will direct this to Kelly. Let's make sure your audio works before, and maybe Stuart can jump in if it doesn't. Are you required to file a declaration with FDA if the HCS doesn't flag for filing?
Okay, before I start answering, I had the echo gone.
It's still a bit echoey.
Okay, so maybe Stu, I'll have to ask you if you'll take that question. I don't want to cause any disruption here with poor audio.
Yeah, sure. So if so the question is do I have to file an FDA PGA message set if the tariff number isn't flagged? And like most agencies, I think all agencies, in fact, use the tariff numbers as indicators that it may or may not be regulated. However, they all have a little clause, their little sideline there that states that regardless of whether we have flagged that tariff number or not, if it's regulated by us, you need to file a PGA message set.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you for jumping in as well. The next question will be for you too. And it's, how do you know which HTS codes will require a certificate of compliance?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and really one that we have been bantering back and forth with CPSC. You know, they have told us for a couple of years now that they're looking at approximately 300 tariff numbers, but they keep this tariff list very closely guarded, and their position right now is that everybody should know what they are looking for, you know, in a product and what products that they're regulating, whether it's a children's product, what have you. And you know, so we've been pushing back on that very, very hard, and I seem to sense a little crack in their resistance of publishing these 300 tariff numbers. Some of that I think is because they feel like if they only publish 300, that it's just related to that last question, you know, that if they don't flag it, then people aren't going to think that it is regulated. And that's just not the case. You know, they can have the same caveat that everybody else does. But, you know, we've also pointed out that we understand that these flags are not necessarily, you know, all inclusive, but that, you know, it does give us an indication on whether they should, if they have an interest in it or not. And in fact, it's in their best interest if they want people to file, that they would have some type of an indication other than just a description of the goods. But I would encourage you to go out and look at that CPSC webpage, that 9-block page. You can get a really good idea of the products that they regulate really quickly. So, so I would highly encourage you to do that.
Right. Thanks, Stuart. The next question actually is also related to CPSC, and probably you could find the answer on the same webpage. But the question is, do you need to use all parts for the CPSC pilot, or can you pick and choose?
Oh, as far as participation in the pilot, it is not an all or none. You know, so if you have a certificate of conformity and, you know, maybe you want to test one that's fairly simple and one that's fairly complex, you know, that's fine. If you want to have some that are registered in the CPSC database and then have others where your broker is submitting all the different data elements, you can do that. So, you know, it is a pilot, and I would encourage you to test your information just as much as CPSC is testing the process.
All right, thank you. Let's see, Kelly, if your audio is back.
Okay, with my headphones on, is the echo gone?
Yes,
Excellent.
sounds perfect to me at least.
Okay.
Hopefully to everyone in the audience as well.
Yeah, so I did see a question come in saying because of the echo, someone didn't quite hear my discussion about the DUNS number. So if we have time, I'd like to repeat that. So perhaps it's going to be more understandable. Yeah, so all of the importers who import food products regulated by the FDA, they need to register their facility with the FDA. Part of that registration process is to report their DUNS number. And then with every import transaction, the broker who's submitting your entry has to transmit the DUNS number as well. And if it does not match what the broker is transmitting in the entry and what the importer had reported in their registration, we will get a hard stop reject message, and we'll have to get that corrected before the entry will be approved. So yes, the DUNS number must match what is being reported on the entry and what was reported to the FDA on that facility registration.
Perfect. Heard that loud and clear this time.
Excellent.
There was another question for you. Can you retrieve a list of HTS codes that are flagging any PGAs using ACE? We kind of touched on that earlier.
Yeah, so with the HTS that's published, it does show all of the PGA flags that are known at the time. I think as Stu had mentioned previously, sometimes they're not 100% reliable. So your broker does have access to that. And if you have, one or two commodities, products you want to check, I would recommend just calling your broker, have us look it up on the table we have, and just verify that, yes, in fact, it's flagged for a particular PGA or multiple PGAs or none. If you have an entire database, hundreds of products that you want to verify, we may recommend you chat with a consultant such as STAS, Sandler Travis Trade Advisory Services, which is a UPS company, and they could do that as project work for you to delve into what are all of the PGA requirements for all of your products.
Fantastic. That actually covered the other question that I had, which was how do you know if your product is regulated by a particular PGA? Anything to add, or that's pretty much same process, right?
Yep, same thing. Yep. So again, there is a list, and your broker, UPS has it. I'm sure every broker in existence has that list that can be referred to just to determine which PGAs are flagged, if any.
Wonderful. I think that was all the questions we got. Let's see if we got any new ones before we end. There's one questions about CERT. Who issues CERT of compliance certificate of compliance? I assume is it the manufacturer? Do you have an answer for that one?
Yeah, I had a little bit of trouble hearing you. I think you're asking about the CPSC certificate of compliance.
Yes.
It's really a certificate of conformity. And for children's products, that certificate of conformity is actually issued by the third-party tester, so that they would state what regulations they have tested that product against and whether it passed or failed. For a general certificate of conformity, that could be done by either the manufacturer or the importer based on information provided from testing parties, whoever tested that product. So again, they all have to be tested. It's just a matter of if it has to be that independent third-party testing or if it can be done, quote unquote, in-house by the manufacturer or the importer.
All right. Thank you, Stuart, and thank you both for a great Q&A. And thanks to all of our audience for being active in the chat and sending your questions. We always appreciate it. With that, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. And as a last kind of announcement, after you close out from this webinar, we have a post survey, and we would greatly appreciate if you could give us feedback on whether or not you found this valuable today. And if you had any questions that weren't answered today on a call, you can also indicate that in the post-event survey. Give us your contact information, and we'll get back to you on any questions that might not have been answered. And with that as well, if you want to request the slide deck, I would submit that information also in the post-event survey, so we know who to send it to. With that, I would like to thank you for being with us today, and have a great rest of your day.